irrational thinking parts of the brain.
You know, what are some of the biggest paradigm shifts that you've seen happen in your, as you and Richard have been going across the country and across the world for Go for No?
The whole philosophy of Go for No, which seems counterintuitive, like no one in sales wants to get a no. We've all been taught and trained to get a yes. That's what we want. But the whole idea is that you don't get more yeses by avoiding no's.
Compliance, she says, will never take you where commitment can go.
What does it mean right now for someone that has the survival brain, and what kind of feelings can they expect to go through?
Glad to see you guys are still, still doing your thing, keeping it nice and light, and also great value. It's always great to see people who are very positive at this time, and a lot of people aren't. So it's great to see this, guys. I'm real happy for you.
And so here's why it's so important to ask questions. Because if we think we know what they are thinking, okay, we are going to present our product or service in a certain way.
And I created the Sales Health Alliance to help empower salespeople to reach peak levels of sales performance, but also peak levels of well-being through better mental health.
Social distancing, sort of being in partial lockdowns, not being able to communicate and be in touch with people the way we normally do. It's really difficult because we're social creatures.
How do you keep your feelings from clouding your decision making? Great question, Ryan.
Oh, fantastic question.
Great question, Ryan. So here's the thing, right, Ryan? You have to look at business and personal, right? Don't mix the two.
Okay, I'll backtrack. We have 7 universal expressions. So we have happiness, we have sadness, we have fear, we have surprise, we have disgust and contempt. And these are the 7 expressions we all make.
How many people would go 2.5 years working towards their goal with not a single paycheck?
I failed. I lost my business. I lost my home. I was a multi-millionaire, Dan and Nick, in April 2012. April 2013, $400 in the bank. No credit cards, no way out, no credit, no nothing. I mean, it was all gone. And I now look at it as a growth pattern. If I had not gone through that pivotal time and through the pivotal moment being a custodian with someone's spoiled milk and trash can on my bare skin, I would not be who I am today as a coach, a consultant, a speaker, because I wouldn't be able to connect with people on a real level.
Nick, Dan, I got to show you guys a little bit of love. I appreciate all of the skilling up, all of the things that you guys have taught me that I've implemented in my business, the guidance, the support, the trainings, everything has truly taken my business to the next level. Me as an entrepreneur, someone who's less than 1 year into my business, there are things that you just don't know, right? That you guys have decades worth of experience in growing businesses, netting high value deals. And so I just appreciate everything. How do I know it's working? How do I know the brains, the brain science, the sales psychology, the customer profiles, all that type of stuff? How do I know it's actually working? Because I netted 3 extra clients in the last 2 weeks. So there's actually an ROI. So I appreciate you guys so much. And man, I'm looking forward to a lot more great shows. Thanks.
So important. And some of you are probably thinking at this point, my sales isn't really going the way I need it to go, or the way when I've been selling, it's not working.
This is where we walk into a dark room and we turn on a flashlight for the first time. We see things we haven't seen in front of us. So Dan, one for me has to be planting the seed, right? I think the next one is EQ, not IQ, looking at routine. We've talked about this a little bit. Finding your rhythm. 3 things you can control and 1 you can't. Which one do you focus on? Work out what we can control, be comfortable with what we can control, and let go of what we can't control right now.
And I want to add something to this list too. A break.
We get to really understand the context of what might be happening in their world right now.
You thought about what would be right for the client. You thought about what would make that easier, and you didn't do it from a point of view of what's going to fill your wallet. So again, thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate that. Is there anyone else that wants to share as well? Because this is the time to do that right now.
And I'm going to challenge all of you to really, really look at your business and say, how can I make everything 0 friction for the customer? So Tyler, you're on the exact route you need to be on. in trying to
No,
create
not
that
you.
zero friction for that customer. Welcome everybody to another episode of the NRDD Business and Sales Coaching Show. Today, we have a big one. Before we get going, my friends, here we go with a little intro.
I can't talk now, okay? I'm working. All right, bye. All right, you were saying?
He's needy. Every day it's, what did you do? Who did you talk to? Who did you email?
And CRM?
Doc, this is a partnership. I can't provide my 360-degree view if she doesn't share her daily activities. It's about being transparent. Who's that?
Somebody.
Who's Jordan Allen?
He's a prospect. We're talking.
Why I do not know about him?
We're talking.
If CRM don't know about it, it don't exist.
Fine. Then he doesn't exist.
See, Doc? That's what I'm talking about. Disrespectful. Don't appreciate organization.
Doc, I'm great at selling,
She at the top.
but I need some space so I can do it my way.
Your way. Pen and post-it notes.
My system worked.
Spreadsheets?
Yeah, and privacy.
If CRM don't know about it,
Then it don't exist.
I sound like that?
Yes. I'm only with you because I'm forced to be.
Okay. Time's up.
Move! Bitch.
All right, guys. Welcome to another show, the NRDD show, episode 7. Look, we are going to get real down and dirty today with workplace stress. A lot of people don't feel workplace stress exists. COVID has really bubbled this to the surface in a major way, and we are going to get down and dirty with our wonderful guest today, Mandy Morris. If you're not following Mandy Morris on LinkedIn, come out from underneath the rock you've been hiding underneath and follow Mandy Morris. She is amazing. She has so many strategies, so many amazing tips. I love it a bit. Discovered her about 3 or 4 weeks ago and said, you have to be on our show. And we've just gelled ever since. She is the director of Mosaic Counseling Group. So it was with my absolute pleasure that we introduced you today to Mandy Morris. So Mandy, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me on. This is wonderful. You guys are awesome.
Thank you so much. I know you've seen a few of our episodes and you know how it works, but today, Mandy, I really want to go back to the pre-conversation we had, and I want to get down to this sort of down and dirty with workplace stress and what it means to be stressed in the workplace environment right now. We know from studies that we've done, 45% of sales teams globally are stressed out. They are stressed out from the point of view of how they're going to hit their numbers, how they're going to produce their results, how they're dealing with their customers, how the sales team are dealing with their managers, how managers are dealing with their staff. This is a very real thing. And one of the things I want to kick off with is we all talked about last week when someone says, I'm fine. It means they're generally far from fine. Would you agree with that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I think it's important to understand why we just say that automatically. Because when we say I'm fine, what happens is we don't want to put our emotional burden on others, or we are afraid of how they'll react and how they'll respond. And so we just kind of push our emotions aside and say I'm fine when we're really not. But not having good emotional EQ, emotional intelligence, is really going to affect our cognitive ability and our ability to be productive. And so the catch is that when we don't talk about our feelings, it actually makes us less productive. And that's also important for leaders and bosses to know as well. If you're not tending to the emotions of your employees, then you might be having employees who are working at their 50% best versus 100% best.
You know, one thing that I in a little bit of a research before today's episode, and it just blew me away, and I actually posted about it this morning, was that like workplace stress, workplace burnout equates to $330 billion in lost revenue. To me, that's absolutely insane. From your perspective, Mandy, and what you've seen in the marketplace, is it more on like a sales side? Is it more a management side? Is it more of an operation side where, you know, the individuals that are in more of a customer service area, like are there specific areas you seeing that are popping more than others when it comes to seeing more workplace stress?
Yeah, good question. Honestly, it's in every industry, and it doesn't surpass any one industry. It all goes down to leadership. If it's rarely about the environment, and it's always because of the tone that's set from the leaders, and you know what they do to make their employees feel like they're approachable, it being emotionally safe, also being able to navigate how to do constructive criticism and the needs of the people who are working for them. I mean, there's definitely going to be some employees who, just because of maybe their personality or how they deal with things, create some of their own stress, but it really is going to boil down to the type of leadership that's there and what kind of environment they're creating for their work environment.
So, Mandy, let's get a little down dirty with that, right? We know that good managers have staff that work for them very productively and they enjoy working for their manager, and we know that that makes a good leader or a good manager, right? What happens when a manager has a team of people right now in this COVID environment? They're talking about how stressed they are, they're talking about how they're not going to hit their numbers, and they simply don't know how to relate to their staff. They're not relating to them in an IQ format. What can they do? What sort of things can a manager that is experiencing those sort of issues with their staff right now, what can they do, in your opinion?
So I think the first thing is that you have to deal with everyone's fears and your own fears. Whatever that is that's coming up, that's building stress, and really lean into that. You know, and let's talk to you about the definition of stress, because stress, kind of in its simplest form, is too many demands with not enough resources. And so when you can break it down to, okay, what are my demands and where am I lacking resources, that can be a path to start problem solving, and to start analytically looking at what's going on. Now, the other part of that too is dealing with the anxieties that everyone's having. So if there's pressure, there's going to be fear connected to that. So you may want certain outcomes that come from your business or from your employees or from that project or whatever. But if it isn't happening, you're going to have to stay in the reality of what's going on and meet with people on the emotional level. One of the examples that I give is, like, let's say you have a kid who is, you know, he's getting up, going to school, you know, the parents hurrying him in the car because he's going to be late. And what if he woke up and said, you know, I'm really feeling a lot of anxiety today, or I'm feeling depressed, I'm really worried. You know, if you're in this culture, then you're probably like, well, let's talk about it on the way to the car, or on the way to school in the car, or let's talk about it when you get home. Now, if that emotional side never gets addressed, that kid is going to be sitting in, you know, his class, and he's going to care less about what civilization did what that he's supposed to be learning, because his emotional needs haven't been met. So he's going to be less productive. And the same is true for, you know, leaders being able to tend to the emotional needs of themselves first and foremost, how to model that, and then also to others, because if they have stuff going on, not that you have to be their counselor or their therapist or anything like that, but you know, their emotions about the work and about the pressures. If you can take time to deal with that, then you're going to have to, then you won't have to take so much time dealing with their behaviors or that outcome that isn't happening. You know, you're going to spend your time one way or the other. It'd be better to spend it with emotional intelligence, EQ, at the forefront of your mind, and looking at the demands resource ratio.
What kind of support do you think is being provided today for managers so they can deal with this sort of stuff, Mandy? Simple question, what kind of support do you think is being provided for managers that can help them to understand? They actually need to understand the EQ. They actually need to understand more about their teams and staff right now.
Yeah, I don't think there's support. I think there needs to be more support. One of the things that I do is I can go in and do trainings on EQ and how that affects people in the workplace and things like that. But there's not enough of that out there. I don't know of too many people who've gotten an education in business or to become a manager who talks about the emotional side of all of this and how that directly impacts the workplace. And so there needs to be more things like that. There is a great resource out there as well, Brene Brown. It's called Dare to Lead, and it's a curriculum that talks about the importance of vulnerability in the workplace and how that is like the cornerstone of having a successful business. And it all goes back to what's going on in our emotional state. And so there isn't a lot of support. And I think there needs to be more education around this. And my hope is that even with us doing this live, this can kind of get some of our leaders thinking about how do they need to become more versed in emotional intelligence and in their own mental health and well-being for themselves and others so that they can have more productivity.
Yeah, for sure. And I think if we look at the resources that are available for them, if I can just say this to everyone right now, if you are a manager, a leader, a director of a business, and you are struggling with this, please reach out to us and have a conversation. The reason that Dan and I specialize in what we do and bring people like Mandy on the show is we recognize that whilst there's things like Herman Brain, Myers-Briggs, and DISC, and all these different personality styles that we've been taught to use, the reality is right now, COVID hits, and we really only have two choices that we use when we're dealing with people, negatively and positively. And you can either take an approach where you're starting to find out more about how you do deal with your staff in a more positive way and become more productive, or you can say, oh, my staff have to do what they're going to do because I'm the boss and that's the way it's always been. Those days just aren't going to work anymore. With things like COVID coming to play, the challenge really is, how do you deal with your staff to get the best results out of them so they feel they're giving the best results to the company and it's a win-win situation? Dan, you had a question for Mandy?
I sure do. So, Mandy, I mean, obviously we're dealing with multiple industries, multiple personality types. What would be, say, if you were to give 3 suggestions to some managers out there that are watching, even some salespeople out there that are watching, to really help them mitigate this stress? I've known stress my whole life to be a killer, and it's crazy what it does to the body. But is there simple things that anyone can do, whether it be starting a conversation, a manager versus employee kind of conversation, where they can help mitigate a lot of this? Or is it something that just because of external forces today, it's kind of, there's nothing you can do?
Yeah, great question. So first and foremost, one of the phrases that I use is pay attention to the tension. So that is literally paying attention to where you feel that stress in your body, where you feel the tension. The mind-body connection is very real. You may think logically, I'm not stressed, everything's okay, but it's coming out in your shoulders or in your gut or in your sleep or in your personal life. And then just get curious about that. What is that tension about? Is it about the way you're being treated by, a higher up, or not having a good working relationship with someone else there? Or is it about too many demands, not enough resources? Just start to pay attention, and from there, you have to begin to respond to your body and what it's needing. Your mind and body are always giving you signals and cues that we can easily miss if we're not careful. And so, and sometimes our body picks up on stuff before it even makes it to our brain, and we know why we're stressed. So that ability to stop and almost become the inner scientist of yourself is important. And then from there, you may need to look at, for a lot of what happens in the workplace, a lot of it boils down to boundaries. Boundaries with yourself or with others. You may need to start setting limits for yourself. Let's say, there's a boss who, or someone who talks to you in a certain way that makes you feel stressed, or they're being kind of a bully or being mean. You may have to have a conversation of, I don't listen when you talk to me in that sort of way. Can we find a better way to communicate so that I can be more productive for you? Or learning how to make your job about your job for yourself and not about the people that maybe you do or don't like in the workplace. So, and I think also being able to verbalize when there's something going on emotionally, whether you're having anxiety, pay attention to what that's about. I know, Nick, you shared before about just some of your dealings with anxiety. If we don't make ourselves stop and recognize what's going on, your body's going to make you stop. It'll cash you out real quickly. And so I think it's going to start with being honest with yourself about what's going on and what your needs are, and then finding ways to verbalize that. You may need to get support from some other coworkers who are also feeling the same stress. How do we talk to, our manager about that, or a manager talking with other managers, like, hey, what do we need to do? Let's do this together. Because when you have support around you, it's going to help ease the stress. And then obviously, if you have to go up to anyone hired to get more resources for relief, that's important. But trying to avoid the conversations or not deal with it isn't going to help at all. And for some people who have really stressful jobs, learning to leave work at work, even mentally when you go home, is really important, because you have to be able to turn that off. And so really having a social life and a good support life outside of work is important too. So, those are a few places that are like beginning steps. I think that depending on the situation and what needs to happen with what's creating the stress, then you would dig a little bit deeper. But it's really going to start with paying attention to the tension that you're feeling and observing it, analyzing it, and then doing something with it, even if it means having the hard conversations.
Mandy, if I could, sorry, Nick, I got to get this out. One thing that hit me in what you were saying was that taking it home with you, right? That stress that builds up from work and kind of taking it home with you. A lot of us now, home is work and work is home, and there's very little separation in that environment anymore. What would, hence, most companies still don't have full staff in office. It's kind of like rotating, right? So what are some of the strategies that would differ from if you go to an office? I always used to tell my sales reps, I just put on a bulletproof jacket when you come into the office, and all the no's kind of bounce off you and you take it off and blah, blah, blah. But is there anything from a home office versus an actual office when it comes to disengaging in that after hours, or when it comes to personal time as opposed to business time?
Yeah, so this has been the topic since the pandemic hit, of everything bleeding into each other, and everything gets blurred. So what I do for myself and what I encourage people to do is have actual physical boundaries where, one place is where you do work, and like if you have a separate office where that can be your workplace, or if you need to set up a little area on a table where, that becomes your workplace, and literally make it a physical boundary. So that when you're there in that room or in that setup, you're in work mode. And then that way when you're done, you can leave the room and not go back into it until the next business day, or you clean off your desk if you can, or put something over it if you can't clean off your desk and it's like in your kitchen somewhere where you're not seeing all of it. And then also another thing, and it's something that I have to do to mentally turn it off, is I literally, at the end of the day, I take my watch off. And that's my cue that I'm off the clock. And actually physically not feeling that on my arm anymore, there's like a mental association with that. You know, getting out of whatever clothes you're in, putting on different clothes, making actual rituals around separation is going to be really healthy for you mentally. And then turning off the notifications, you know, making sure you're not checking your work email, putting the phone down, you know, having some good boundaries around yourself with that. But when I started doing those things for myself, I could see a big difference in the way I was able to disconnect from my work in a good way. So those are a few just super practical tips that I think could be helpful for people who have to work at home.
And I think there's lots and lots of things we could go through with your experience talking about how people deal with ways to communicate with other people. Dan tends to wear shirts that either look like pizzas or that they're made for small children. Is there some way I can share with him that I'd like him to burn those shirts in a positive way?
I mean, if that's what you need, then as long as it doesn't ruin the relationship, you, Nick.
Oh, now you're totally on my wavelength. Here we go. Okay, so we could now start. Now we're gonna warm up the shoulders here, Nick, a little bit. We're gonna get little things going here, Mister. Yeah, I wore a nice one today. Look.
Muhammad Ali, buddy. It's more like sort of chicken dust. Hey, no, serious question though. When you're looking at communicating with someone and actually taking the opportunity, I love one of the Mandy moments that I refer to with you. You said lean into the fear, right? What if you're a manager and you've got a fear that you're not going to go and communicate with your staff effectively and you're going to lose them?
So that's where
you're still caught on my shirt. I know. I could tell.
That's where having the courage to be vulnerable and learning about that is really important, because as a manager, as the person who's supposed to be the go-to guy or have it all together, being human and being like, this is hard for me. And I'm going to lean into the fear of vulnerability, which is uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure, probably to your employees. And I'm going to be honest about my fears, my anxieties, because when I do that for myself, I make it safe for others to do that. And so when you can lean into the fear, that means that you're going to actually deal with it. We tend to avoid anything that makes us anxious. It's part of the human condition. That's normal, but it doesn't get us anywhere. And so when you can, so one of my favorite things to remember whenever I get anxious about something is I'm about to have a lot of courage right now, because courage can't exist without fear. And so if you can frame it for yourself in that way and be willing to lean into that, because it's not a weakness, it's normal. You know, I think that's the thing, is that a lot of, especially managers, bosses, CEOs, they feel this need to appear strong all the time because there's this false belief that emotions or anxiety is a weakness, and it's not true. It's part of being human. It's part of knowing that you're about to do something to take a risk. And I don't know if that answers your question or not, Nick, but that would be what I would say.
No, Mandy, it answers it perfectly. And what I love about it, it segues into number 2, which is you always talk about humanizing things, and you've just done that in our entire show today. You know, you're making things more human and more humane in terms of how you speak to people and using EQ and IQ. You know, one of the things you said was make sure that you understand that people have feelings. Make sure that you understand that you treat them like people. Can you just explain where you've seen clear differences between when someone's being treated like a person and when they're being treated like a number in a business?
Yeah, so that's like, you know, spouting out demands, you know, not receiving feedback from the people that you're talking to, expecting that they have to have certain outcomes, and just being really rigid in the way in which that you're addressing your employees. Having a very fixed mindset is not going to be helpful. Or, you know, people who their personality tends to be one where we all like to have power and we like to be in control, and that can go too far sometimes in the workplace to where the need for that then makes you lose sight that these are actually people with needs and with emotions, and the way you talk to them and what feedback you get from them really does matter, and so it's being able to let yourself have conversation where maybe you're talking to them about a task or whatever, and you make it open for them to address their fears and concerns and have that sort of comfortable dialogue. Even if it means you spend a little more time with some of your staff, you're going to spend your time either being frustrated over what's not happening or bad behavior or whatever, or you're going to take time dealing with the emotional side, the more fears, anxieties, processing that stuff side in the beginning. It's just a matter of, do you want to be proactive and preventative, or do you want to be triaging and dealing with collateral damage later?
So, question for you here, because I know that I'd like to just jump back prior to when Nick started asking questions, if I can. I think I'm answering my own question, but do you find a lot of the challenges coming from more on the male side that's not willing to express their feelings or feel that the feelings make them weaker or less of a manager or less of that person that's supposed to be out front?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. So men and women are naturally wired differently, and this, I'm going to make kind of a blanket statement, and this isn't true for everybody. There's a spectrum of things with this, but men tend to, when they're stressed, go more inward and process on their own and deal with it on their own and then distract themselves. Women tend to need to talk it out and externalize more, and so I think that's one piece of it, that there's a difference in communication that happens when stress is there. Naturally, not saying that one is good or bad, it just feels more natural that way. The second thing is that we do live in a society where more men than women, I would say, have been conditioned to feel like having emotions are weak, or that makes you illogical or something like that. I think that is sort of this subliminal message that has been out there for a long time about it. But at the same time, I think there's a whole nother ball game with people being in leadership roles where they have power and authority, that if they're not careful, that role can make you believe certain things about yourself that aren't helpful. Like, I have to be in control and I have to have it all together, and therefore I can't show certain emotions, or I can't appear to look a certain way. And therefore, if you're not doing that for yourself, how can you do that for other people? You're going to not be open to their emotional side of things as well. And so I know that's kind of a roundabout way of answering. I think there is differences in gender, just of how we're more typically wired. Our brains are wired differently. But then also your upbringing, culture, society, all of that plays a factor into it as well. And so it's really no one thing in general. And, depending on the boss too. I mean, I know just as many women in positions of power who, aren't open to this emotional intelligence thing either, because, they might think it's a waste of time, or they think that, that's not their job to deal with people's emotions, and so they're not going to go there, and that's fine, but they're going to be triaging later on.
A moment to share this. So, guys, workplace stress crept up on me, life stress crept up on me. 4 years ago, I went through what I thought was a small heart attack. and I had a family history, and it wasn't surprising if that's what it was. It wasn't. It was a panic attack. I didn't even know what a panic attack was. That led to anxiety. That led to a panic disorder that I had to work through for 2 years to get myself worked through, understanding what was happening with my body, reading the signs, all that sort of thing. Stress is very real. You may not think it's creeping up on you right now. You may not think it's even happening for you right now. I know from recent conversations I've had with doctors around the world, stress can be in the big toe, it can be in the heart, it can be in the chest, it can be in your shoulders, top of your shoulders. It can manifest itself in so many different ways. And all I would like to leave you guys with, especially you guys out there, us big rough guys out there, just think to yourself, there's nothing macho about suddenly collapsing because, you didn't speak to someone. So if you feel like you've got stress going on in your life, reach out to someone like Mandy Morris, reach out to even Dan and myself. There's nothing worse than not being able to lead the way you'd like to lead because you're not dealing with something that's going on with you personally. And, I don't think this should be a gender thing. I don't think it should affect males and females differently. I think more men need to be less macho. Like I said, this is a confronting show, and actually reach out and say, hey, I might be a bit stressed, talk to their staff, relate to their staff, have meetings for the sake of having actual meetings and speaking to their staff about what they can do to be more effective and how they can help their staff, and just be willing to share a more emotive side of who they are, and I know you'll get a better result. Don't let stress creep up on you like it crept up on me. Mandy Morris, you have been absolutely sensational. Dan and I would love to thank you for being on the show. It was everything we thought it would be having you on the show, and I think we'll definitely get you on again because we couldn't cover off enough in this short half hour. But thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you. I really appreciate you guys. You're doing great work, and it's just an honor to be on the show. So anytime, I'd be happy to come back. Super grateful for you both.
Awesome. Just want to let you guys